So, welcome back. We're very grateful that you're here, and also we're moving from this big picture of the evolutionary perspective, from the data from ethology as well as evolutionary anthropology, and then into ecology with a very powerful set of presentations on the past, but also a sense of where we are in the present and of what we're facing in the future, unless we see a way to modulate power and integrate it with care. And this afternoon, we will be exploring what happens inside the experience of the human being at the level of psychology, of endocrinology, and of neuroscience. So I want to invite Alexandra Freund, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Zurich and has done important studies on motivational behavior throughout the life cycle. So, Alexandra.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roshi. Your Holiness. Dear audience, when you think about who the most power-motivated person is, who comes to your mind? Some of you might think of people like Hitler or Stalin or Mao Zedong. People who typically do not have the best of mankind at their heart. To the contrary, we think of them as people whose power motive has extremely negative and devastating consequences for many people and for mankind. However, now think of Mahatma Gandhi, not a power-motivated person at first sight. He can be considered probably as one of the most caring persons, but he was also presumably highly power-motivated. He took power away from the British to give the power to the Indian people for independence. And you need power to do this. You need to lead people into his peaceful fight for independence. So there is also power motive, a strong power motive in somebody like Mahatma Gandhi. And in this short talk today, I will take a look from research in psychology to look at both sides of the power motive, the more negative side that comes to mind more easily, but also that power can have very caring aspects that we also want to harvest when we think of the power motive. What do I mean when I talk about the power motive? It's something we talk about in psychology a lot, but it's not something that everybody is familiar with. So let me give you a very brief definition and first point out that in psychology, a motive is not the same as motivation. And that's an important distinction to make. Motivation is more like the general fuel for actions in general, that you do anything at all, or that you direct your thoughts to anything. But the motive is the goal towards which you direct your fuel. It's where you go. It defines the direction of your actions or your thoughts. And the power motive is defined as the motive to exert influence and control over the environment and other people. So it's you want to change the environment, including other people, according to your vision of how things should be or to your goals. Some psychologists claim that it is central for our development that we exert this kind of control over the environment because it helps us to shape the environment in a way that we can flourish. Very much as you could argue Mahatma Gandhi shaped the Indian environment in a way that he believed the Indian people would flourish. You need to do this to a certain degree yourself with your environment in order to flourish yourself. Power can be highly stable, it can be a disposition, or it can be a momentary state. As a relatively stable disposition, research has shown that it actually, the degree of your personal power motive is very stable throughout the entire lifespan. It will not change very much. But what can change dramatically from one moment to the next is the power state. It's the power motive state. It's whether at this given point in time you are triggered by power, you want to exert power at this moment. The power motive does not necessarily have to be conscious. A lot of times we are not aware at all about our power motive. We might not even know at all what we want at a given point in time. We're not always aware of it. But it can also be conscious. There are aspects of which we are aware when we exert power. How do we assess these conscious and unconscious aspects of power motive? It can be assessed via self-report, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily are correct in your self-report, but it's still a very important predictor of your behavior, what you think about yourself. And we use questionnaires to assess the power motive via self-report. So there are statements such as, I like to have the final say, and you can say to what degree does this statement apply to me or not. Or we can use to assess the more non-conscious, unconscious aspects of the power motive. We use so-called projective tests, such as the picture story exercise. Here you see a picture that doesn't have a very clear story. If you see this picture of the captain of a ship talking to a man in a hat, you can come up with different stories of what this is all about. And if you were a participant in our studies, we would ask you, what do you think about the story? What is going on here? Tell me the story, what's going on here. And then in the next step, what I would do as a researcher, I would code your stories according to how much power motive is expressed there. You could say, well, the captain is clearly the boss, and as a boss, he explains to the passenger how the voyage will go. This is a power motive. A boss will explain, passenger is subordinate. But you could also say, the two have just met and they're thinking about a nice dinner that they will have tonight to get together and to talk more. That would clearly not be very power motivated. We also activate the state component, which is highly malleable from moment to moment, by experimental manipulations. How do we do this? We ask you, for instance, when you come to our laboratory, to think about situations where others had power over you. That's a low power condition. Or write and think about all the ways that you had power over others, and that puts you in a more powerful position. Another way is we just assign a role. We walk around and we say, you're the boss, you're not. Sorry, Roshi.
I can handle it.
I know. And surprisingly, just telling somebody in an experiment, you're the boss, you're not, has huge consequences, and I will show you some of them in just a moment, of how people feel, perceive the situation, and behave. And then there is the way that's currently preferred in psychological experiments. You embody a pose of power. So this would be a power pose. the boss's pose, and this would be a subordination pose. Clearly, you bow down. And we've seen examples in the talk this morning by Frans de Waal, who's shown us that animals have that too, and it seems to be very powerful in animals to express their rank and their standing as well. So what does it do with people when we experimentally manipulate them into power? There are strong social consequences, both of the dispositional power and of the assigned power role. Overall, one could say power is related to paying less attention to what's going on with others. How do they feel? What might they want? You just care less when you're in a position of power because it's about you. And there are a lot of negative consequences. You just don't consider the perspective of the other people. So if we induce power in an experiment, the other's perspective is less accessible cognitively in this experimental situation. It also decreases the compassion for the suffering of others. And that's an important point because it does not only concern the experimental situation where you might not ever see the other person again. It would also matter, I would argue, but maybe less so. It's been shown to also affect the compassion in a partnership. So even your spouse or very close other, you feel less compassion for their suffering. And it shows how strong the power motive can influence your not only relationships to masses, like in politicians, but also to your close others. It increases the objectification of others and the use of others as means. So you see others as, do they help me to achieve my goals or not? Is this person in my way, or is this person helping me? You categorize them according to their role for you. It decreases the willingness to help others, even if you're brought experimentally in a position where you could. You're endowed with means to help others, but you give less, let's say, for instance, for donations. And you even sacrifice the interest, your interest on behalf of close others. It decreases trust and increases cynicism. So you believe because you are perceiving people as a means to your goals, you also think that others do the same. You don't believe that there is something like compassion. You will say, you're more likely to say, other people are just the same as me. They are not trustworthy. We cannot trust their compassion. And it decreases the desire for interpersonal harmony. So you just don't care as much in an interpersonal situation whether there's harmony or not. Also not good for close relationships, by the way. There are also, I promise to show you the positive sides of paying less attention to others. It sounds paradoxical, but it actually isn't once you start thinking about it. And this is, again, empirical evidence from experiments mainly. So the positive consequences is that you yourself feel less distressed in socially stressful situations. Probably because you feel, I don't really care that much what the others think about me, so it's not as stressful for you. You do react less strongly, also hormonally, by the way, when you're in a power situation. And it increases the resilience if you're excluded. So a typical experiment is you play ball. Let's say Roshi and I play ball, and Markus Heinrichs is also included in the game, but we never toss the ball to him. We just toss the ball between the two of us, and Markus sits there and watches us. So that's it sounds silly, but it leads to strong feelings of social exclusion. And if Markus Heinrichs is not in a powerful situation, he's more likely to suffer from this. If he feels powerful, he will not care that much. He's more resilient to this feeling of being excluded. And here comes a truly paradoxical finding. If you are a pro-social person to begin with, you're interested in the well-being of others, and you're put into a powerful situations, your ability to understand what's going on in the others even increases. So paradoxically, even though you pay less attention in a power situation, if you are a very caring person, you will be better tuned in these situations. Powerful people have more social ties. They actually report to have more friendships. It would be interesting to see whether their friends see it the same way. And it decreases loneliness. Powerful people feel less lonely. There's a very interesting article that's called "Not So Lonely at the Top After All," because we keep thinking, well, it's really not good for you to be powerful, but they are less lonely. And I find this also important, people in a position of power feel more authenticity in the way they can express themselves, and they also report more happiness, higher subjective well-being. So, to sum up, there is a dark side of power. If you're brought into a powerful position, you have a higher likelihood to manipulate people, to use them as means to achieve your goals. Power corrupts. There are fewer people, there are fewer checks and balances, fewer people who will tell you, this is not okay, this is not something you can do, supposedly also because they're afraid of the consequences if they tell you that. Which leads to entitlement, and it leads to the feeling of everything that I do is good, which is typically not the case. But there's also a bright side of power. It fosters authenticity. It increases subjective well-being. And I would say, it hasn't been really studied yet, but I think this is where we need to go in the future. It could empower people to care more. And this is why I have started with Mahatma Gandhi. Because he was a person who took power and who was a very powerful leader. Or think of Martin Luther King. Those are powerful persons who were in positions of leading others, but at the same time, they used it for compassion and for caring. So I believe it's important to not just say we need to move away from the power motive. I think we need to embrace the power motive to the degree that we carry it in us, or the positions that we take, in order to use it for a more caring and compassionate world that hopefully moves more in the direction of what Johan Rockström showed us this morning with regard to what really needs to be done to better this world. And with this, I would like to close. And thank you very much for your attention.
So I think we'll wait after all of the presentations for the discussion with His Holiness and our presenters. And Marcus, yeah, if you would switch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Alexandra. I'm so grateful. So, Your Holiness, this is Professor Marcus Heinrich, who is chair of the Department of Psychology at the University of Freiburg, and also has done very interesting research around neurochemicals, particularly oxytocin and other neurochemicals, which perhaps he'll get into during the discussion period. So, Martin.
Thank you, John.
Marcus.
It gets chemical. So, Your Holiness, it's a great honor for me to be invited here in Brussels on this outstanding conference. And I would like to talk about the biology of care, and more specifically on social hormones. And that is one hormone we already heard about in the morning, called oxytocin. For this purpose, I would like to come up with a very simple, probably a bit too simple definition, and I have to apologize for that, because my definition is very simple. Care is given if our chemistry is right. I know that this is a very reductive definition, and regarding the chemistry of social attachment or of care behavior, of trust, I think we have to talk about this molecule, which is one of the most prominent molecules in the last decade in this context, and that is the ancient birth and breastfeeding hormone, as I said, oxytocin. What we know for nearly 100 years now is what is shown here on this picture, that the baby with the suckling stimulus starts oxytocin production in the human brain, and then oxytocin is released to the blood and comes to the breast, and from there it makes milk ejection possible. So breastfeeding is exclusively modulated or regulated by this hormone. And for us today at this conference, it's of course interesting to ask the question, does the same hormone also have direct effects in the brain and on social behavior? And in the last 10 years, we can say, including humans, that this is indeed existing. So this hormone is in the brain available, and it is distributed not everywhere in the brain, but in particular in those brain regions that are important for social behavior and for emotional processing. And this has been shown then for behavior in pioneer work, first in animals, and these studies can show that the hormone is clearly regulating maternal behavior, social attachment, pair bonding, and gives an individual a better control in a stressful social situation. And more recent work in humans show very similar results in terms of oxytocin increases social emotional recognition. Oxytocin makes it easier for us to keep eye contact, which is a very important factor for care, trust, pair bonding, and again gives us a better control of stress responses in a socially threatening situation. And when we stress people in the laboratory, we do that using this test here, TRIA social stress test, as many other researchers in the world. And this is a test that consists of 5 minutes of a public speaking task. This is something like a job application interview. And then there is another 5 minutes of mental arithmetic. So that means you have to count backwards from 2023 in 17 steps. That is not very nice and simple, and it leads to dramatic increases of the stress hormone cortisol, for example, or blood pressure and many other things. What is very prominent in research, in stress research, is this famous sex difference between men and women, and I would like to show you this with regard to social support. So social support given by a man and social support given by a woman is obviously a very different thing. So the first white bars are men stress responses. And what you see is when men come alone to the stress, they show a dramatic stress response. When men are supported by another woman they never met before, this is a bit better. And when men are allowed to bring their own wives or partners, this is very, very beneficial. If you are a woman, and there are several women in the room today, there's a completely different picture. You have, on average, lower stress levels when you come alone. You would probably not really benefit from a man you never met before. And there's a very bad news for women who bring their own partners or husbands, because increases the stress, right?
He's probably wondering why it's so.
So,
Wait, Marcus, hold on.
we wait, sorry. So this is not good for men, but also not good for women. And this is a very old question, 20-year-old in literature. What could men do? And Your Holiness already mentioned that in the morning, that touch, physical contact is sometimes much more powerful, in general more powerful than talking. And the most easiest advice would be stop talking for men and do something like this here, because this is what he can show in humans. Yeah, and I would like to show you two experiments. The one is we stimulate the oxytocin system via touch, physical contact, a neck-shoulder massage. And the second is we administer this hormone, this breastfeeding hormone, via nasal spray to the brain and see what happens then in a stress context. The physical contact, show you a very simple experiment. This is the stress response of women who come alone to the stress test. A very normal stress response in the stress hormone cortisol. This is the stress response of women who were supported verbally by their partners, by their husbands, right? It's again a bit worse. And the next curve shows you what happens when men are not allowed to talk at all, but just apply a neck-shoulder massage. And this is effective, right? So it might look funny, but it's really a very, very powerful effect that you see here from touch for 60 minutes. So for 1 hour you have this protective effect. The other possibility to do that in research is to administer it intranasally, and what you can do is you offer social support or no social support to people, to men in this case, and you offer placebo, nasal spray, or oxytocin nasal spray. And when you do that, you have two extreme responses. The one is the highest stress response in those who receive no social support and placebo, and those who receive both protective factors, higher oxytocin levels in the brain, and social support show the lowest social stress response. So the last thing I'd like to mention in this context, talking about care, is eye contact, because this is probably one of the most important prerequisites for the development of empathy and care, and also attachment during the life course. And this starts very early in life, in the first days of life, with mom, with dad, probably with brother and sister. And this stays a condition for the whole life, be it direct eye contact. You see that also in many movies, be it more indirectly or even more indirectly. You would always have these kind of social interactions, and eye contact plays a major role here. And you can measure that using a very simple test called Reading the Mind in the Eyes test, developed for autism. And this test shows eye regions, and you are asked to say, what is this person feeling or thinking in this moment? So you have 4 alternative labels, and one is correct. And what we find is when we administer oxytocin or placebo, that oxytocin increases this ability of reading the emotion in another eye region in healthy individuals. And we also know that in autistic individuals, this also helps autistic individuals who have severe problems to be better in understanding emotions from the eye region. So, and I'd like to close with by mentioning that oxytocin is probably not only relevant for individual behavior, but could be an interesting biological basis of intergenerational transmission of care in humans, and that is shown here. So parents with higher levels of oxytocin are more likely to show more empathic responses to babies' cry. They can better control stress when babies cry, and this obviously helps to show better responsive, affectionate caregiving, and that means that it stimulates the oxytocin system in the baby, and these babies are then more likely to become more securely attached children in later life or adults, and when these adults then become parents later, that would be the step to the next generation. And so the oxytocin system might be relevant if everything is working, but we have to keep this in mind if things are problematic in attachment and caregiving. So my last comment is that care, seen from this mind-body dialogue perspective, I think needs to carefully consider the neurobiological basis of caregiving and of social interaction, because this is also interesting and relevant when we talk about new therapies or new treatment strategies in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, so Tanya, why don't you switch chairs with Marcus? Yeah, I think we'll move on.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Your Holiness, you know Tanya Singer, and I think many of you in the room know her as well. She's a neuroscientist doing research in a number of areas, including in a very powerful intervention which cultivates compassion. And we're going to look at, it's beautiful coming out of the work that Alexandra's talking about in terms of motivation, Marcus, the neurochemicals associated in this case with care, and then an actual intervention that might change the kind of culture that we're living in. So Tanya.
His Holiness, it's a pleasure to show you some new data since we met last time, and I will present data actually on the concept of plasticity. So the concept of trainability, flexibility, change, and malleability. And not only from our brain, but also behavior, hormones, stress, all levels. And I will give you a contemplative neuroscience perspective, and contemplative science is basically bringing together contemplative practices from the East with the science from the West and hoping to do the best of both worlds. So the objective of this talk is to introduce you into how we do that, how do we do meditation research, and I'll talk about a resource project. This is a one-year mental training study in which 300 participants were followed over the course of learning new mental meditation and mental training practices. But I also want to tell you with this data that we can't stay with the story like, what is meditation doing to your brain? Yes, it's changing something. That was early days, but what is a bit like sports, if you train every day your arms, you will not get stronger feet muscles. And if you train every day your feet, you will, get stronger legs, but perhaps not. So you can imagine that mental faculty, even though we can't so much see them, is the same. And I'll show you how different practices trained every day lead to changes in the brain and also behavior of attention or compassion or perspective taking. And they are not all the same. And then I also want to introduce you how this knowledge can actually now be used out of our labs to inform new models of economy and of economic decision-making and of human nature. Okay, so let me start. This is how a retreat looks like in a resource project. But usually people are wearing clothes like you guys. This was only for the photo. So we are like 80 people in a retreat learning new practices. And we had 4 different groups. And the groups went through three months module. So the first 3 months, they learned mindfulness and attention-based practices, like body scan, attention to breathing, attention to the present moment, be here. You know, you focus on an object, perhaps close to shamatha practice. In the second, we call affective module. It's always red, because it's all about your heart. It's practices which opens your heart, practices of loving kindness, metta meditation, compassion, gratitude, and dealing and accepting difficult emotion. And you have to always remember the colors, because this will be color-coded in terms of the data. And the third module is what we call perspective. And this is a cognitive route. This is a cognitive taking perspective on your mind, on yourself, and on the mind of others. What is the other believing? What is the other thinking? So it's less a quality of the heart than a perspective taking on the mind of myself and others. And the blue group just lived their lives. 1 year just living their lives, but got tested like crazy. And so we can see, you know, whether perhaps things just change because you get older. And then you see there were 17 teachers teaching the secular practice. So you could be from any religion or also not believing. You can do this secular meditation programs. And these cell phones, you see, you got them home, and you could practice at home 20 to 30 minutes each day for 3 months, 3 months, and 3 months, so 9 months overall. Okay, and these were the 2 core practices of each of these modules. So, you know, breathing meditation, body scan. I think a lot of people know this from mindfulness-based stress reduction programs from John Kabat-Zinn. You know John Kabat-Zinn. So this is, I think, a practice which has, you know, being practiced a lot now in the West as well. Then in the compassion-based red module, we had loving kindness meditation, you know, gratitude, and then observing thoughts and a perspective diet. We asked people every day to connect 10 minutes with another person and take the perspective of the other person. And why do we separate? And I think I put this bird because I heard His Holiness saying very often, to move towards global compassion, it is like 2 wings of a bird needing. You need the motivation and compassion, but you also need the intellect and the cognitive root and the wisdom and the understanding. And you could think that this is the neuroscientific equivalent, that we know in neuroscience that there are 2 different pathways, 2 different networks in the brain and in the system. One is about motivation and emotion. It is feeling for another, feeling with another, feeling the pain of another, feeling the love for someone and the care. It's what Markus Heinrich basically talked about, the care system. And cognitive route, the green route, is a more rational route, which is extremely important for cross-cultural dialogue. So if someone has different religious beliefs, you need to get in the perspective of these beliefs to understand why a person is acting like that. So you have to detach yourself from your perspective and go like a bird into the perspective of the other. And this is how we... Clear? Yeah. And this is how we measure these two different networks. We put people in a brain scanner, and they watch videos of people telling you stories where they suffered a lot in the life. In some story, you need to understand very difficult beliefs of the other person. So we can extract what we call the two different networks of social cognition. In red, you see the response in your brain if you have a lot of compassion and empathy for the suffering of the other. It's an emotional, motivational response. In green, in the same brain of the same people, you see the network, which allows you to take a cognitive perspective on another person's mind. And they are not different. You can be a good empathizer and a bad mentalizer the other way around. They're independent. And because we knew that, we thought we can also cultivate this capacity independently. Quick.
No, it's all right.
Yes, so we asked, can we train compassion and activate these motivational, emotional care system in the brain and in the behavior? And what I show you now is data after 3 months of mindfulness practice, 3 months of compassion, or 3 months of more cognitive perspective-taking exercise. If you just live your life and you get older, you don't get compassionate. You don't, people said we get wiser when we get older, we just get more compassionate. These data doesn't suggest that. Just flat. Yeah. If that was surprising for us, you do 3 months of attention focus, of exercises which focus you in the presence, which are very good to augment attention and body awareness, but they don't increase compassion, not per se. It is only when you go in the module where every day you explicitly focus your attention, your intentions, and your exercise to opening your heart in compassion, where you have the boost in compassion. And so you see here, it's a very specific effect of engaging in compassion and loving kindness meditation every day. Now, what is the story with theory of mind? Theory of mind is the capacity to understand and mentalize what other people believe. It's a kind of social intelligence score. So this is an effect, you just get better the second time you do this difficult task, but independent of whether you practice or you just live your life. We call that retest effect. Then nothing happens anymore. You don't get better in theory of mind if you don't practice. However, compassion doesn't do anything to your theory of mind. So if you practice opening the heart, it will increase altruism and compassion, but not increase your ability to understand the cognitive beliefs of others. And this is a very specific effect as well. Yeah, showing that mental training, the effect of meditation depends on the meditation you do. But you can and you can cultivate compassion and theory of mind through specific practices. And if we look into the brain, does it not only change your behavior, but also the very structure of your brain, the hardware? And these people were 43 on average, not youngsters. And typically we said the brain is declining, shrinking from 25 to death. And now, can we train the brain? And yes, we can. This is gray matter increase in cortical thickness after 3 months of mindfulness practice, attention-based, present moment focus. So your regions which are processing metacognition and attention get thicker. This is the specific effect of 3 months of compassion training in red, or 3 months of perspective-taking training in the same people. And you see again, these are 2 different networks. Depending on what you practiced every day, your heart, compassion, or the ability to take a perspective of another, you will have different neural networks growing in the same brain. And these practices also improve prosocial behavior. And that was an interesting finding because we used 14 different paradigms where we also used economic paradigms. Where you really had to, trade for money and give money, real money. And so we could extract a factor we call pure altruism. This kind of, you give even if you don't have any reciprocation, even if you don't know the person, you're just generously giving out of your heart, altruism. And this increased most after compassion training, not after attention-based, not after perspective-taking. So this pure altruism emerged out of the quality of the heart. And so perhaps just a last minute or two, telling you how you can use this knowledge now to move to inform models of economy. And this is work which Dennis Noor will show tomorrow, so I'm just scratching on it. You know that economists had a classical mathematical expressed view which we call Homo economicus, and according to this view, human nature is selfish and wants to optimize their selfish gains, just have more of consumption goods, more of just optimize the utility function. And this one motive, is stable about time, it doesn't change, it's independent of the context. This is how mathematical formulation of our economic backbone looks like. I just showed you that with 20 minutes a day mental training, you can change from an egoist to an altruist. So, big cross on all economic models we ever had, based everything on it. So the real, more close picture of human nature is that we have, like Alexander said, all these different motivational systems, and if we activate care, we will increase prosocial behavior and altruism. If we activate power, sometimes in some contexts, we will have competitive behavior. Sometimes we'll also have caring behavior, strategically speaking. So we did experiments to see whether, like Alexander said, we could induce power motive or induce care, and then see how this plays in economic decisions, economic behavior. And how did we induce care? We said to our participants, before they will play with all these games with money, that they will have to watch videos of puppies which they will interact later. And I show you the video, if you could pass the video. You see these puppies, and you will play with them in the Max Planck Institute and interact with them, and that activates your oxytocin care system, as we heard from Markus Heinrichs and Alexandra. The movie is not so good. They typically are normal walking, sweetie puppies. So everyone is like, oh, they're looking like, oh. And power motivation, we did like Alexander, we said, you are the boss. You will have to tell a big group of people what to do. And then we measured the economic behavior. And what we see is that after a very short care induction, your prosocial altruistic monetary behavior increases, trust, donation. If you induce shortly power, what increases is punishment-related behavior. It's a bit like policeman behavior. It's like for unfairness, you punish others, you put a lot of money to punish other people. So you take money away instead of giving. It's also sometimes a good behavior because policemen don't do, they can be very useful, norm reinforcement, but it is a very different sort of behavior which gets primed. And in this data, we were astonished to find that only the males really reacted well to the power induction, whereas the females had fear of power. They expressed a fear of being in this kind of powerful position. We attributed them. So I think this is probably something you know from your research. So in conclusion, what I showed you is, of course, we can change society by what we know, changing laws, changing institutional design, and this is certainly very important. We have heard in this morning, to get CO2 back to zero, we needed institutional and changes in law. But I showed you, I think, an even stronger message, is that even us old people, with 40, 55, whatever, we can change through internal change, just to basically cultivate mental attitude and mental practices every day, just a little bit. All the people in the resource project were working. They were doing their really busy lives, but they took off 20 to 30 minutes a day. And you saw how the brain changed on the level of the hardware of the brain, the gray matter volume, and the behavior. So this is encouraging, because if we would start in education and children, they are so much more plastic. The brains are so malleable. You could all increase compassion, perspective-taking, social intelligence, and capacity I showed you. And this is why I would think we need to start, as you said, His Holiness, this morning, not only focus on the external world, but start really taking seriously the power we have internally by looking inwards and by cultivating intentions of care. And power is not a bad thing, but knowing about what is driving our decision. So thank you for your attention.
So I'd like to invite Dr. Dick Schwartz up to sit next to His Holiness. And Dr. Schwartz is in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard University and has been working in family systems and developed an extraordinary model of family systems that we'll be exploring now with His Holiness.
So it's a great honor to be in your...
Internal family systems.
Internal family systems, right.
Yeah. Great
honor to be in your presence, Your Holiness, and I am so impressed with your ability to listen to all this information. So, as you've been hearing from my colleagues, human systems at all levels, I believe, countries, families, individuals, have these two impulses, one for care, one for power. One being the impulse to have empathy for others, to connect and open your boundaries and create community. The other being to think of the system you're in first and to act in the world to get the needs met in that system. And also to protect the boundaries of the system. So both are very valuable impulses. The balance between them is very important. I think Martin Luther King, Gandhi had access to both power and care, and that's why they could act in such a powerful way. Both can become extreme and take over the system and lock away the other side under certain circumstances. And in my thinking about that, the common circumstances would be if a system has many members who are neglected and needy and hurting would be one factor. If a system has been traumatized, as Franz de Waal was talking about this morning, in the past, and has extreme emotions and beliefs from that earlier trauma, could make one of these two impulses extreme and take over. Also, if a system has inherited extreme beliefs that have come down through the generations,
Yes.
yeah? Okay. And then finally, if the system has weak or biased leadership, can take it in one direction or the other. And so, for example, many countries in the world now are facing an immigration crisis, and there are people in each country who identify with the pain of the immigrants and see them as valuable resources and want to open the boundaries. And then there are other people who want to become nationalistic and want to think of the country first and want to close the boundaries. And countries have to find the proper balance between those impulses. And if a country has a big underclass and a huge divide in income, they're going to be more vulnerable. There'll be more extremes on both sides. Or if the country carries racist beliefs that have been passed down through the generations, then one side will become, and the impulse will be to go more toward the power side. And I've worked with families who, for example, have a very vulnerable child, and you'll find that same power struggle between one parent who identifies with the vulnerability, the sensitivity of the child, and wants to preserve their innocence and openness to the world, and then the other part who thinks the world will crush that child and needs to make them tough and needs to make them suspicious and aggressive in the world. And as each parent believes that the other is harming the child in what they're doing, and so becomes extreme in one direction, then the other parent gets extreme in the opposite direction to the point where both are harming the child, and it can destroy the family. I also find that the caring side can also become extreme and cut off the power side. So, for example, we did a study with 40 rheumatoid arthritis patients in Boston. It was published in the Journal of Rheumatology. Most of whom were Irish Catholic women who'd been socialized to only take care of others, to never think of themselves. And in the study, we simply had them focus on their pain, and instead of fighting it or trying to get away from it, to actually ask the pain questions. And they were surprised by the answers, and often the answer was from the power side that had been exiled, saying that the pain was a way to get some kind of caring from the outside world, or the pain was trying to sabotage the caretaking part that it was so dominant. And as they were able to create a better balance, to actually listen directly more to the power side, their symptoms got much better, and in some cases, they went into a remission. So I've also worked with people whose power side was dominant, who would carry the label narcissistic personality or sociopathic personality. And if we do the same procedure, where I would have them try to separate from that very selfish aspect, become mindful toward it, but also ask it what it's trying to do, why it makes them so selfish, the answers that came back most of the time was if it didn't do this for them, they would feel powerless or they would feel worthless. And if I could have them focus on the worthlessness or the powerlessness, it often would lead them into scenes in their past where they were made to feel that way. And if they could open their hearts to those memories, to that aspect of them, then the power-oriented, the power-seeking aspect would shift. And they would have a better balance. They could have a balance between that power and the care. So part of what I find is that what are thought to be destructive emotions often are just extreme versions of one of those two motives. And because people fight them or try to ignore them, they can become more extreme. But if I can help people become mindfully observing of the destructive seeming emotion and begin a conversation with it, they'll often learn that it's really trying to protect them somehow. And that it really is just an extreme version of one of those two motives. So I'll give a brief case example. So recently I was working with a man who had a continuous impulse to kill his ex-wife. And he was very frightened of that, and he would work hard to distract himself from it or to lock it away. And so one session, I asked him if he'd be willing instead to try to get to know it and see if it had something to tell him. And he was very resistant to that idea because he was afraid if he opened the door to it, it would have more power and it might take over and make him do something he would regret ultimately. But I said, no, it's really the opposite. If he's willing to open his mind and his heart to it, he'll find that it can actually change. And so he agreed ultimately, and I had him focus on it and ask it from a place of compassion and curiosity what it was afraid would happen if he couldn't kill his wife. And again, the answer came back that he would be powerless, and he saw the scene when his wife left him for this other man, and he felt so powerless. And then I had him focus on that feeling of powerlessness. And it took him into a scene when he was 5 years old and his parents were fighting with each other, and his father began to beat his mother, and his mother wound up jumping out of a window on the second floor and hurting herself. And he found he could feel the powerlessness that that boy felt and had tremendous compassion, began crying for him. And once that happened, then the urge to kill his wife transformed into a desire to help him find a new partner, to have that kind of power. And he was able to have more of a balance between power and care. Because I believe that just even going to these vulnerable places in our histories and ourselves releases oxytocin. I was moved by Sarah's slide this morning of the policeman holding those babies. And if I can help even very big, tough men embrace these inner children this way, I believe that it gives them access they didn't have to this care. So So basically my message is, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I find it very useful to go to our inner enemies with the same kind of compassion and curiosity that you advocate for us to go to our external enemies. So thank you.
Thank you
very much.
So, Your Holiness, we'll move now into the dialogue portion of our time together. And I want to thank Tanya and Marcus, Dick and Alexandra so much for your presentations. I'd like to begin by asking Alexandra a question about the psychological connection between power and care.
Yes, I think we typically, thank you, Roshi, for this question. I think we typically do not consider, we see power as a very strong motive that we typically shy away from if we're not in a powerful position already, because we see it as something that might harden us towards others, that we might disregard their feelings, that we might walk all over them. And we see caring as the opposite, that we pay very much attention to what's going on in the other person. And I believe that both is true, but both need to come together. I believe that if you want to take care of somebody, you need a certain feeling of power, that you can actually do it, and that you are able to do something that's good for the other person. It's, in a way, a power position. The other person that we care for, however, is not entirely powerless. They can refuse. You're taking care of them. And if you have ever been in a situation where somebody refuses your care, that is a very powerful kind of rejection. So it's not a simple distribution of here's power and here's care, but they are very intricately intertwined. And I believe that in both situations or in both positions, you have aspects of both that interact very strongly with each other.
I mean, is there like a third state, for example? When power, the wholesome aspect of, or aspects of power are integrated with the wholesome aspects of care, because there's pathological altruism, for example, and aspects of resonance which are unwholesome when arousal isn't regulated. Is there a kind of third body that is the integration between power and care?
You're asking me?
Well, I'd like to hear, we'll start with you, but I mean, I think, we've dichotomized this in an interesting way, and I wonder if there's a third body, if there's an integrative quality.
I don't know of a psychological theory or studies on that, and I think we're missing the interaction between the different motive systems very much. We look at them, as you said, in a separate way, and miss out on this more integrated system that it basically is. I mean, we're one person, and when we act in a certain way, all of these motives come together in a specific action or in how we perceive the world. So I do believe we're in dire need of such a more integrated view, but at the moment, at least, I don't know about you, I'm not aware of it. I think you do it in your practice.
Yeah, Dick, do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, so what I find, in addition to these, what we're calling drives, but and in a non-extreme state are very valuable, as I help people separate from them, and not to push them away, but just to be able to observe them mindfully, people enter this other state just by getting that separation. in which they feel suddenly very calm. We have 8 C words to describe the state. Calm, curious, compassion, connected, courageous, and
That's 5.
I'm blanking. That's
It
5?
is 5.
No, but I said 8.
Oh.
So, creativity and clarity, that seems to be a kind of essence inside of people that I have no idea if it would be comparable to what might be some little element of Buddha nature in Tibetan Buddhism. But the mere act of helping people invite these aspects to open space inside seems to release this state, and once in that state, people have a wisdom about how to create this balance, and they begin to take over the sessions and actually work with each side. So in that sense, yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, wonderful. Tanya.
I had because you talked about pathological altruism and about how to confront that, and you also talked about, the negative side of caring if you burn out because you care. And in neuroscience, we did research on the distinction between empathy and compassion. And so empathy is defined as feeling with, so getting in resonance with suffering. And the danger of this resonance is that you can turn empathy into what is called empathic distress or empathic fatigue. And we have that a lot in helpers and in caregivers and in doctors, that they're confronted with suffering, react with empathic resonance, and burn out, get into a pathological state. And we did experiments also in the research project how to teach people to distinguish between the state of empathic resonance and compassion. And compassion is very powerful, forceful, loving, caring state, which is not to be confounded with empathy, how we define it, because it is not feeling with, I'm suffering, you are suffering, I'm happy, you are happy, it's feeling for. It's feeling the concern and the love and the compassion for someone. And as someone said to me once, you can't burn out of compassion. And what is amazing is that people, even though they juggle always with the concept of empathy and compassion all day long, you need to do this inner experience of how do you resonate with empathy to suffering, and then teach people how to distinguish and how to go in compassion, loving kindness, caring, and this very powerful state of non-judgmental acceptance. And when they do this, the whole body posture changes and the whole empathic distress vanishes, and it becomes a very powerful state. And that's something I guess we should also teach more explicitly people in caregiving position especially.
I was actually
you are
thinking,
an expert in that, yeah.
Well, maybe a beginner. But I think that the word I was looking for that integrates power and care is compassion.
It's compassion.
If we understand deeply how compassion functions. But Marcus, I can see your...
I just wanted to say that things are not so easy, of course, as we grade it down in our talks. And I think that, of course, care is not only good and power is bad, and testosterone is the power and aggression hormone, and oxytocin is the love hormone. Of course, things are more complicated, and as we've heard in the morning in Franz de Waal's talk, for example, the powerful alpha animals need care, and they need to take care of the others to stay in their position. And when we, for example, administer testosterone to women and let these women play a fairness game, and you can lose a lot of money or you can win money, what we observe is that higher testosterone levels then make you fairer. So you are interested in a fair distribution of money, because it's, from our evolution, good if you are in a powerful situation to make sure that the group is happy. So I think it can be artificial to separate power and care and to see this as they mentioned. I think it really is in a very complex way interconnected, and that makes it interesting but also very complicated to find easy solutions.
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you to go a little bit more into the oxytocin, testosterone exploration, and looking at what we know at this point about the positive aspects of testosterone and also the less positive ones. And the same for oxytocin, because I think we have a little bit of a biased picture toward oxytocin. And I think you haven't, this is your work, so you know the downside of oxytocin too. So maybe you can just briefly lay that out for us.
I think the most important thing is that oxytocin, as all hormones, have no behavioral effect per se. So if you give a hormone and people sit at home in their kitchen and they take oxytocin nasal spray, I would predict that nothing happens. Maybe an irritation of the nose mucosa, but you would not see a behavioral effect. So all the things we show in these experiments are stimulated by a specific social situation. And when we now, for example, use this as a therapy, oxytocin alone is never a therapy for autism, for borderline personality, whatever. You always need a very, very innovative and a very complex psychotherapy which changes behavior, which changes experiences, attachment style, whatever. And then we hope that we can increase oxytocin in the brain to make psychotherapy more effective in those disorders we cannot treat so far. So that's the idea. And that is, if you specify an experimental situation, you find interesting effects, of course, of hormones, but the hormone itself would not induce a behavior. I think that is important because His Holiness mentioned in the morning the interplay between culture, spirituality, religion, and science. And I think what we can offer is interesting experiments, mechanisms, molecules, but these can never explain complex things like compassion or care, right?
Wonderful. Yeah, we can clap. Yeah. Yeah, I think that we have this kind of notion that we can, put oxytocin inside the air conditioners and, kind
do that.
Care up the crowd, so to speak.
I tried, it doesn't work.
Okay, no. So, we can put that one aside.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yes. Well, too bad. We wish it were easier. Because Tanya, you've been in this extraordinary research endeavor, the Resource Project, and I'm interested in if you would just say something about the downside or people who are not at all affected by the intervention and why you think that's the case.
So at the moment, we are, it's a study who took 10 years preparation, 2 years testing, so we are at the very beginning of understanding all the complex interaction. We have 90 different measures, from brain to behavior to hormones, and it's a complex interaction, and what you are asking is individual differences.
Right.
So I have not shown you any individual difference, only changes of everyone together, because that's the first step. So I can only say from observation, but we will look at that more deeply in the next coming years, that, for example, in all 3 groups, when you started to do, the mindfulness-based modules was easy for everyone. Easy. I mean, the mind was dang, 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 of course, like we have busy minds, but everyone could accept these practices. When we came into the compassion practice, into loving kindness, it was very obvious that almost in all 3 independent cohorts, we had 3 independent cohorts, there was a fraction of people who couldn't so easily open the heart, but really were blocked. They said, I can't touch a loving, caring space in me. I can't feel this care and motivation. I don't even have an idea of a person I should imagine where I feel loved, and which really had a very hard time. And some stayed over 3 months in this state of not being able to really practice this practice. And others, after 2 weeks, tadum, there was a big kind of breakthrough where I think something releases a lot of tears and crying, and then...
What percentage, Tanya, of each?
I can't tell you the numbers because we need to really look at but for my observation, I think it was always about a third which kind of struggled, perhaps a bit less, and then half of them were like really getting it after 3-4 weeks, and then you felt that this huge love could kind of pour out and healing happened, and others just blocked. So we will look now, what is the history of these people in terms of their attachment, of their anxiety levels, of all these levels, and for whom which practice is better. Another observation we have not done research properly yet, but one cohort did perspective and compassion, and the other cohort did first compassion block and then perspective. And it seems easier for people first to learn how to get a bird's eye perspective and a detachment and equanimity before they go into like the hard practices. And I was very intrigued by asking His Holiness whether in Buddhist and I would ask, is there any notion in the practice of Buddhist practice that it is better to have a sequence of first stabilizing the mind, basic mindful attention, then gaining a perspective, and only then entering into real compassion practice? Or is that something we just discovered here, but it's not matched by traditions?
Of course, I much appreciate I think a number of people really taking interest about the importance of emotion or mind. And then, accordingly, try to deal these different emotions. So that's a good beginning. As I mentioned this morning, you see, the real troublemaker is within our own mind. If our own mind peace and wider perspective, and external problems will not disturb your mind, you can maintain peaceful mind. Even including your own physical pain, certain way of thinking. There, even physical pain can, because of the more manageable, like that. So sometimes physical pain may gain some sort of deeper satisfaction, like that. So, and then I think I want to mention the word meditation, or single-pointed sort of mind, or just focusing one sort of object. It is not, I don't think, real training of mind. No, simply mind or mind scattered. No? So try to channelize. So that itself is not our goal. Our goal our sort of mind always go scattered. You see, that channelize. Then focusing some other thing. That's, I think, then mainly usually we call analytical meditation. So here, intelligence is the key factor. Analyze, analyze. Then, compassion.
Okay, so they have...
Biologically, we already have that kind of experience. But that's biological, not result of through training. So very low level. And often it's a biological factor, compassion, very much mixed with attachment. So attachment, hatred, is a go together. I think someone has mentioned. I think they try to kill ex-wife. The very reason that lady become wife, there is a lot of attachment. Otherwise, to say, will not take place marriage. But you see that attachment, that sort of loving kindness, some kind of compassionate attitude, very much mixed with attachment. So when from that sort of person, some little negative things happen, which you feel something negative, then immediately change. More attachment, more hatred come. So what we are trying to promote, affection or compassion, is not that kind of mixed with attachment, but through reasons. So the reason, pros and cons. What is the value of warm-heartedness? And what is the value of anger, hatred? Think, analyze. Physically also, the anger, hatred, very bad. As this morning also I briefly mentioned. So then, compassion, genuine compassion, not a kind of compassion because of the mixed with attachment, not that way, but genuine compassion, genuine sense of concern. Firstly, that compassion can reach even your enemy. As far as their action is concerned, their attitude is concerned, negative. So sometimes you may need some appropriate countermeasure in order to stop their harmful action. Out of sense of concern of their well-being. But usually I make distinction. Action and actor. Action is concerned, sometimes we need countermeasure. But actor is concerned, still, in most cases, human being, like me, they also want happy life, do not want suffering. So on the basis of understanding that, you say you keep sense of concern of their well-being. So, you see, all this, you see, thinking, analyze. If you have, you see, through analytical meditation or use reason, then that kind of sort of mental attitude, once you gain more experience, then your enemy, so-called enemy, will not disturb your peace of mind. So you really, you see, keep a sense of concern or compassionate attitude, compassionate thinking. So that usually we call infinite love. So that comes only through use reason. Training means familiarize your mind. Firstly, 투중 싫어.
So firstly, at the level of understanding,
Wait,
From hearing
Jimpa's mic needs
or
to
reading.
be...
That's not much stable. Then second level of understanding is thinking, more reason, more time. So then you get conviction. So firstly, you heard, compassion is something nice. Okay. The second level, you seriously thinking, investigate, and including scientific findings. You also do the explanation or presentation. Then further you think. Then you develop the second level of understanding. That brings conviction. Then familiarize that. Sometimes it may take years. Then actually you gain some experience.
so at this third level, which is arising from the basis of this conviction that is arisen as a result of critical reflection, then once you start making it more experiential, initially it will be an effortful state. So initially you will have a sense of comprehension. The first stage there is a sense of confidence that if I try it out, I can do it. So that really is the first level of experience. And once you then embark upon the actual practice, then you get to a level where it's experiential, but it's still effortful. And then again, through more habituation and cultivation, that experience can then become effortless, spontaneous.
Then that experience actually become part of your life, part of your mind.
Part of your nature. No? Part of your nature.
Like that. So I'm like to it.
So responding to your question specifically, yes, there is a sequence. Therefore, for compassion practice, after the mental kind of stability, the first step is to really cultivate this equanimity.
So also, usually our feeling, as I mentioned earlier, as it was your friend, mainly use the reason they are helpful for me. Their attitude is nice. So attachment there. Then some kind of, because of the kind of loving kindness. But enemy side, it's a very negative attitude towards me. So instead of loving kindness, but hatred or anger, suspicion. First, that must remove. So, because of equanimity.
Equanimity, yeah.
Equanimity. Then, equanimity, another word, I think, kasota, ignore what is their attitude, but thinking they are human being.
It's common humanity.
Same. So both deserve our love, our compassion. 심지어 도코미아사 지겨래. 제가 야고래디 다 약시 랑진지기 견 현진지기 연대. 다그 현지 동네다 양다적으로 마셔나 산재니도 민주주의 코아나야 대화 메스타 때문에라도 상동다.
So as part of a preparation for actual meditation on compassion, traditionally there are two methods that are used. One involves cultivating the attitude towards all beings as being your loved ones, like having been your mothers in the past, which is kind of a traditional practice. But the more effective one is to really reflect critically upon the negative consequences of excessive self-centeredness and the positive consequences of thinking more about, caring more about others' well-being. And for example, Shantideva says in his entering the Bodhisattva's way of life, he says that if someone is not able to exchange one's own well-being with that of others, then not only is there no hope of attaining Buddhahood, even in this life, there will be not much place for happiness.
Obviously. Obviously, see, 7 billion human beings, nobody wants trouble. Nobody wants problem. But many problem is actually our own creation. Why? Nobody wants a problem. But at the same time, many problems which we ourselves created. So that is not lack of holistic view, and then also that is the song.
So if one is not able to, engage in these kind of reflections, then we continue to follow our habitual kind of self-centered approach.
So it's a scientific sort of, because of the finding.
Okay.
It's very, very helpful, very helpful. In order to carry education about warm-heartedness, if we say, God says that, or Buddha says that, then some people will say, okay, nice, very nice, okay. But you see, actually our daily experiences, and then out of compassion, so what's the
benefits?
The benefit, your own physical and family level, much happier. 1 family, 10 family, 100 family, 1,000 family, community, much happier. Through that way, 7 billion human beings become much more happier if through training, through understanding about this inner value, through education, then I think humanity will be more happier humanity. And then, so this, from where we start, not from government, not from individual leaders, or including spiritual leaders, but we individual, we have to start through analytical meditation, bring conviction, then become part of your daily life, and through that way, you can bring peaceful family and share your experience with your immediate sort of family member, then your neighbor. That's the way to change our society. And motivated with affection, then because of any our verbal action, physical action, also mental action, then become constructive and more compassionate mind, more determination, more willpower. So that is very positive, constructive power. Anger brings some sort of because of power. That's destructive power. So all these, I think everybody's mouth say, world peace, world peace. Peace only come through inner peace, full of anger, full of sense of competition, and fundamental belief, I should win, they should defeat, lose. How can develop peace? Very difficult. So I think, although we have the word contradiction, we consider something negative.
So generally when we think of contradiction, we take it to be negative.
But ourselves always create contradiction. gendu singe de manri bi ina sosum gendu me shawa.
So if we don't like contradictions, then avoidance of contradiction has to really start from within first.
So in any way, I only sort of, because of the one mentioned, you see, the training of mind is possible. It is necessary, not based on quotation of those scriptures. You see, those great masters, Jesus Christ or Buddha or Muhammad. We simply, you see, because of the use the scientific finding. So, also because of our speakers, so your presentation is really wonderful, really wonderful.
Your Holiness.
So thank you when you make some because of the detailed presentation. I felt world because of the map of mind or emotion, not symbol. So
it's also saying that when you listen to these amazing presentations from each of the experts, presenting a particular aspect of the human mind, he kept thinking that it's more complex than this. The picture is more complex than this.
Because eyes
it's almost like seeing at the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, exactly.
So you experts, wonderful. But your explanation is part of that
big picture, the big world.
A big world. But this is very good start. So then further investigation, further discussions, or further training. And I think within 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you gain some new experience. And the result, you will be more calm person, more relaxed person. So then no need tranquilizer or drugs. Okay.
So we have a few minutes left in this session, and I hope that we can just reflect back on this morning's session with this ethological perspective, the anthropological, and then the ecological. And what Johann put before us as a case about our present and our future, and also what His Holiness is saying in terms of self-responsibility and the human mind. And so I think it would be helpful if we concluded this session with each of you very briefly reflecting, just thinking about what Johann laid out at the end of the first session, because we're faced with issues that are really profound in terms of structural violence, environmental violence, direct violence of war, and also the implication that we can actually put our hand on the rudder at this point. We are at the tipping point much more quickly than had been understood, even probably during the Paris talks, that we're in a time of criticality. And it is an extraordinary opportunity for us to, if each of you could just, go to essence, speak to what you feel we can bring into the future in terms of making a future that's even livable, but also a future that is compassionate. Starting with you, Alexandra.
Of course, I have the solution for this. Huge question, thank you. I think part of our problem is that we view ourselves as powerless vis-à-vis these tremendous problems that we've seen in the slides this morning, that we feel that they are overwhelming us and we do not have any power to change it. And I think situations, and there's some research on this, of feeling powerless lead to inaction, lead to the feeling of it, everything is futile anyway, and to cynicism. It's like no matter what I do, it won't make a difference whether I fly around the world 3 times or not. There are like big companies that really spoil the earth, so it's not my action that matters. And I think powerlessness and futility, if you feel you don't have a voice, can even go so far as, and some psychologists say this, to these radical actions such as are involved in terrorism. If you constantly feel that you're not heard, that you do not have a voice, you might end up looking for horrible means that are truly destructive to yourself and to others to be heard. So what can one do? That's, of course, the million-dollar question. I think seeing on the slide that Johan showed this morning that with regard to the ozone layer, we actually were able to do something with banning certain substances in refrigerators or in sprays, that the ozone layer could be repaired, is such a great finding that in a relatively short amount of time it was possible to repair something, to empower us to actually take action. Take action obviously on the political level, but I do believe that if we change our mind set to that, yes, the things that every single person of us does to the environment and in the interaction with other people, being truly respectful and being truly caring, will help. I know this sounds very blue-eyed, but I don't think that there's any other way of actually starting and initiating change.
Thank you, Alexandra. Dick.
So I was struck by what Tanya was saying about the group that couldn't do the compassion practice. And I would be very curious to know how many of those people had a trauma history. Mm-hmm. Because what I find is that for people who've been abused and often have aspects of them that are frozen in those scenes, opening your heart is a very dangerous prospect. And there are these power aspects of them that will prevent that from happening. And I'm afraid that the meditation community hasn't really taken that into account enough. Because my philosophy is more of a constraint-releasing one, where if you can't open your heart, there might be some parts of you that don't want it, and they need to have a voice before you keep trying to build up that muscle, or they might backlash. So in terms of bringing more compassion, I think it's important to take that side into account as well.
Wonderful, Dick. Thank you. Marcus.
Yeah, I'm personally simply impressed by the tolerance and encouragement of His Holiness regarding our, as you rightfully said, very molecular, very reductive thinking and work. So I keep it short, and so I will go right back after that conference to my department and move on to understand social behavior in humans and try to bring the details back to the complex world, and hopefully that's what we all hope in the world, in my field, to develop new treatment strategies. And for that purpose, we have to understand things like power and care, not only on the biological level, but also on levels we discuss here at this conference. So it's very encouraging.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so I think I really believe in the extreme power of individual transformation and change. So I love this work so much I can do as a scientist, because I can see how through these mental practices people really change. And really, without taking any drugs or any money, it's just within, with relatively simple exercise. And even though I realize, of course, it's a lifelong transformation, it's only very easy steps, the power of seeing people transforming is huge. And we heard this morning of tipping points in the macro level. There are tipping points in the micro level. So there are exact nonlinear tipping points also if you cultivate certain qualities in you, where the whole system can, in a nonlinear fashion, tip, but not just to the catastrophic endpoint, but also to a real transformation. And so I would not underestimate the power of inner transformation even on the macroscopic level. I think they are mirroring each other. And of course, we need institutional changes, we need changes in law, but who are doing the law and who are designing the institution? Humans. And so if they don't understand from within why, there is no force and power to change anything. So it's really there where I think we have to start. And also, this is the only responsible thing we can do, because I can be responsible of myself. I can't change you. I can't change the state, but I can set my intention every morning to something else and become conscious. I can, so why not doing it? This is, where I would stand.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone, so much. I feel that what we're doing is we're laying out a number of questions, but we're also opening up avenues of investigation that are really important. But more than avenues of investigation, we're trying to engender moral action in a world that's imperiled. So I thank you, Your Holiness, Dick, Alexandra, Marcus, Tanya, and all of you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We wait.
解答。
Yes, workshops are beginning at what time? I'm leading one with Brother in 30 minutes. Wonderful. And then there's a performance after the workshops. So we're not done yet.
第三科学不当家。
对呀，我。